Hello, my name is Andy Schmuckler. Um, I appear here regularly at 11 a.m. Monday morning Eastern and Thursday morning under a banner, A Man on a Mission. Um, this is going to be a different kind of conversation. I have even less than the usual amount of knowledge about how well this is going to help advance my purposes of my mission. But I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to talk about a few movies. Maybe I'll start with talking about how important movies are to me. I was always a fan of movies. Um, I had an economist father and a theater mother, actress, playwright, and what I learned from her. Well, I learned a lot from her, but a lot of it had to do with watching movies together, and it's part of our family culture. My children are all into movies, and it's hard for me to overstate the importance of the role that movies play in my daily life. I'm a hard worker as part of my family culture too. And I've been working for, it's 20 years that I've been sort of staring into the heart of darkness. Um, and I need escape rather regularly. I started in 2004 looking at what was rising on the political right. And by 2007, I had the only time in my whole life that I felt like I needed a vacation. And so my wife and I, we were living in Albuquerque then. And so we took off. We went, we drove to the Grand Canyon and then we flew to the Bay Area where we got family. Anyway, I needed a vacation because it's really, really hard on me. I think there's been a certain amount of PTSD ever since. I mean, there are things that I can't really stand for very long in terms of certain kinds of stress. I mean, I feel it's sort of a confession because I can admire somebody like John Wayne who would never show that kind of a stress. But I keep on fighting. I've been fighting this fight for 20 years, maybe 30, depending on where you count. But I need to go into a different world rather regularly. So what I do for my in my workday is I've got a DVR. It's like you can create a library of 100 hours of recorded material. I've got maybe 8-10 hours of newsy kinds of things where I can follow what's happening in America and in the world. More of that stressful stuff that I'm continually looking at. But mostly I have movies, and people are amazed at the way I use movies. The way I watch them is that I watch more than one at a time. I've got probably, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 movies going right now. I enjoy the mental process of keeping it all in my head. I don't know. People seem to think that that's unusual. You could keep everything in your head, but I mean, don't we all do that? I mean, don't you know some of the details of one thing or another going on in the world, like the Mar-a-Lago case or the Eugene Carroll case or what's happening in Ukraine? I mean, we all keep track of a lot of things. But it's not just because I like to keep track of a lot of things. I find that even when I'm watching the movies, after I've absorbed that world, and I like getting into a new world. When I get into the new world, whatever the movie is I wasn't just watching, I feel like I can relax into it. Oh, okay, this is what it is. Then after about 5 or 10 minutes, I'm sort of taking on the tension of that drama, and I could use a break even from that. But there's also a third thing that makes the movies this break from my work, and then I take breaks from even the breaks from my work. But there's another thing that makes movies really a handful of different movies. Like right now, I'm watching Deja Vu, the Philadelphia Story, a movie called Northwest Passage, all very different worlds. It reminds me of something that is connected with some of my most meaningful experiences over the last 50 some years. There's one of my favorite places on the earth is Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And I love the way there are all these different spaces. Like you can go into this Crystal Palace place where it's a greenhouse where all kinds of tropical plants are growing. You can smell gardenias growing right off a branch. And then you can walk over to the Japanese garden, which is this magnificent construction that been created, which is almost like magnificent landscapes that have been created in miniature. And the beauty of all. Inside there's a big statue of a Buddha, and you can contemplate that Buddha, and that's a whole different space. And then you can go to into the Arboretum, where when I was younger, I loved frisbeeing in this wide open space, and you could walk across the street into a garden that's called the Shakespeare Garden. It's got all these different herbs that are mentioned in Shakespeare's literature. And it's a lovely little spot, not one of the major ones. And then there's a place where there's a museum with artwork from the Middle Ages, and across the space from there's an aquarium. What I'm saying is I get a lot of pleasure from looking at the sort of the manyfoldness of our world, and going from one movie to another sort of opens up my spirit to having accommodated all those different spaces. It does a lot for me. It's refreshing in itself, rather to get away from the focus, the man on a mission who is concerned about how are we going to protect American democracy against the rising force of fascism, and how are we going to get human civilization in the not so many years, decades, generations, a couple centuries, if we've got that much, to get our act together. Get away from that focused purpose that sort of has been at the heart of my life since a day in 1970 that resulted in that book, The Parable of the Tribes, The Problem of Power and Social Evolution. Anyway, that's an introduction about what I'm about, and a little bit also about the role that movies play in my life. That I just love them. I love the escape of them. I didn't used to believe in escapist stuff. When I did in college, I wrote. It amounted to a book actually about tragic drama. The Athenians. Shakespeare and his contemporaries writing these. I was into the heavy stuff. I noticed that my children are not into escapist stuff the way I am. You can Google my last name, Schmuckler, and an op-ed piece I wrote called "In Praise of Escapism." At this age, I'm about to turn 78. Escapism has some appeal. I kind of wonder how much that has to do with how much I've been dealing with the heaviest stuff there is to deal with. Well, I don't know. Maybe being a cancer doctor is just as heavy or even heavier. I don't know. But, and I don't know how much it's got to do with getting older. I think young people are more resilient. I think old people feel more vulnerable. But anyway, movies. To get into things and also to get away from things. So a few movies that I've got on my mind that I've been sort of using in my mind to think about some things that are of importance to me. I'm going to start with the movie You've Got Mail. I'm aware that as a sort of an old guy, I think about things that are older than some people think is of any interest. I don't know what to do about that. I watch movies that were made before I was born, so it's not just that I tune in on and to me, You've Got Mail was, not that long ago. You probably, it's a movie that stars Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. And they made it because they'd made another romantic comedy, Sleepless in Seattle, which I'm also very fond of, before, and it had been very successful. A lot of people talk about You've Got Mail as sort of a derivative thing, like Spider-Man 2 or something like that. You had a success, so you make another movie to cash in on the interest of the audience. But I don't look at You've Got Mail that way. I love that movie. In fact, I have this little list of movies I think are close to perfect. Another movie that's on that list, I would say Casablanca is almost perfect, though I don't really like the ending. That's a whole other question. I don't think that sending her off with this guy, this guy didn't need her to play his role in history. And I think that when people are in love, that has a lot of weight. But our hero, who's been so selfish, Rick, he says, you got to go and let me think for both of us. Another male chauvinist move. But anyway, Casablanca. I think that near the top of the list about nearly perfect movies is the first Godfather movie. And then, Groundhog Day, I think, is also a nearly perfect movie. I think You've Got Mail is too, and the other movies have a lot more prestige in the world than You've Got Mail. But for one thing, when I see, besides the fact that it's a great story and a great romantic comedy, and I love romantic comedies. In Sleepless in Seattle, there's a scene where the woman is crying, talking about this romantic movie with Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr, and she's crying, and then the guys make fun of her by talking about Dirty Dozen in the same way. It's a great scene. But I like romantic comedies, but knowing a certain amount about movies, I know that this is the third movie, at least as far as I know, there have been only three, that's really the same story. The first one was called A Shop Around the Corner. And then there's another movie with Judy Garland and Van Heflin. What's it called? That's, I think, the only movie those two made. And all three of the movies are people, a man and a woman, who have these two parallel relationships, and they don't know that they're relating to the same person in this relationship as they are in that relationship. In the one relationship is a relationship where they're corresponding in some way. Now, before there was email and the Jimmy Stewart and I forget her name, they correspond by letter. And that's true about the second one too, which was made well before there was email. And in that, they're anonymous in that one. in that relationship. And they're getting very close, and they have a lot of feeling, a positive feeling for each other. They haven't met face to face, but they've developed a rapport. Uh, don't remember if they tell how they found each other. I mean, was there a dating app back in the 30s when they made the Jimmy Stewart version? Anyway, this takes place also in, I think it's Czechoslovakia. Uh, but in that relationship, they're very close, and they're eventually moving toward, they got to meet because they've got this great rapport. But then they have an actual relationship. It's two people in the world who meet each other and deal with each other. And in that relationship, they are at odds with each other in some unpleasant way. Now, the point I want to make about You've Got Mail, why it is, in my view, so superior to those other two. In those other two, the man and the woman in their relationship where they don't get along with each other show themselves to have so little communicative skills, so little maturity, that I throw up my hands and I say, these two people are not ready for a meaningful relationship. A love relationship really requires, I mean, to be really successful, really requires some good communication skills. There are ways of communicating with each other. When you've got problems, there are ways of communicating with each other that are destructive. And there are ways that lead forward into something good. You can resolve conflicts. You can get past things. And in both those other movies with Jimmy Stewart and the Judy Garland, both of them, I think. I mean, I want to believe in the relationship, but I can't. I mean, I can enjoy the movies some because, there are a lot of talent goes into making those movies, but I can't believe in the relationship. To me, communication skills are really quite fundamental. Where should I start? I mean, I have training as a clinical psychologist, and that's about communication. And then I got to be involved in the Encounter Group movement in Berkeley in the late 60s, which was an important experience. I was a member and a leader and a trainer of leaders. And I also studied enough to be somewhat familiar with. I was never a devotee of nonviolent communication. But I believed in the general principle of finding ways of expressing one's own feelings and needs that maximize the chance that the person hearing you might be able to take it in and respond in a constructive way. And then I did a lot of radio where I live here in the Shenandoah Valley. I'm not going to play with the camera and show you the forests and mountains that are out there to my west, but I live in the Shenandoah Valley, or in the mountains flanking the valley, and I did hundreds of hours of conversation with a very conservative listening audience that was also being exposed to Rush Limbaugh for 3 hours a day. And I worked very hard, and I think actually successfully, to create a community of discourse where I said we could talk with each other in a genuine spirit of inquiry and mutual respect, as if we might actually learn from each other. And I think we did learn from each other. I learned a lot of respect for conservatism in the forms that existed back then. I mean, conservative America is not what it was then. I mean, there's nothing conservative about what conservative America has become, and that's a whole nother story, which I talk about if you look at my other videos, or if you go to my website, betterhumanstory.org, I talk a lot about that. But in 1999, MIT Press brought out a book of mine, the subtitle of which is A Quest to Bridge America's Moral Divide. And that's what I was engaged in here. So I really like communication that's healing, that's constructive. Um, the Jimmy Stewart and Judy Garland romances, they got so much more that they'd have to learn before they would be able to have the marriage that that we're to believe that that's like a comedy often is. It's a romantic comedy. Comedy always ends in a marriage. I mean, Shakespeare, Aristophanes. I don't know, Aristophanes. Do they end in marriage? It's been a long time since I read Aristophanes. There's a wedding picture, me and my beloved. And, it's a second marriage for me and a first one for her. And I just feel so fortunate that we can share everything with each other. And we had to work on it. And but we both began with me at the age of was 38 when we met, and she was 32. And we both been through a fair amount, and she's just such a wonderful person. And yeah. But anyway, we are able to communicate with each other in a way that makes a marriage very fulfilling. I mean, one of the things at this age that one contemplates is I'd hate to leave her alone by dying, and I can't stand the thought of losing her. But anyway, that's another topic. But the You've Got Mail movie is different from the others in a very fundamental way. I like to see movies where my protagonists, the people that I identify with, I feel okay about identifying with them. Maybe I'm too much of a goody two-shoes or something, but I really don't like to have a protagonist that does things that I just disapprove of, or am turned off by, or am disgusted by, or make me think, oh my gosh, you're not ready for a relationship. Both Tom Hanks, the character, and the Meg Ryan character are people that I can watch at every stage of this movie, and I can say, I can see doing that. I can see feeling that way. I can see acting that way. I can't think that way about the other two movies that are the same story, different, retold in a different setting and form. The Tom Hanks character is he's this mega bookstore mogul, like Borders or what was that one that was before Borders? But anyway, and he's driving Meg Ryan's little bookstore out of business. There was a time when that was happening. Independent bookstores were being driven out of business. Things have changed in the capitalist world. Barnes and Noble, I guess, is another big. But anyway, they create a fictitious mega bookstore, and they create a fictitious independent bookstore, and that independent bookstore is everything to Meg Ryan. Her mother established it. She has all her memories there. She has this little staff that she employs, and she has their devoted following, and he's driving her out of business, and then she gets driven out of business. She fights. So part of the battling in the real world is an understandable battle between of this appealing young woman fighting for survival against this, big box bookstore that's going to threatening what's at the center of her life. Perfectly understandable. And interestingly, the Tom Hanks character, when when they're exchanging emails, You've Got Mails about email, he's counseling her how to fight him. He has no idea what the situation is. He has no idea that she's his adversary, but he tells her, go to the mattresses, referring to that other perfect movie, or near perfect, The Godfather. Um, and then, as is always the case in these movies, one of the people, I think it's always the guy, discovers that these two relationships are the same. Now, in You've Got Mail, Tom Hanks and his friend, played, I think, by Cuba Gooding. My wife observes how often in movies, at least of a certain era, the hero's best friend is always black, and I think that's, it's, you can observe it, and it is a big improvement over the movies made in an earlier era when I was growing up, where nobody was black except for the maids or the porters, which is also another story. But anyway, there's a date, to meet at this restaurant, and Tom Hanks, escorted by his friend, goes to meet, and he sees, because I forget, they have some kind of a signal. I mean, it's not the red carnation from what's his name, John Dillinger, but some kind of a signal, so he can tell that the young, lovely Meg Ryan sitting at the table is the woman he's come to meet, and she's the same woman that he's had these exchanges with in the real world, and that interesting dilemma. As I recall, he goes in and he sits down, and she doesn't want him to sit down because she's waiting for her, the love, her love, whom she's never met. Anyway, really fine movie, and they start developing a different relationship, and it's really great to see how Tom Hanks uses his knowledge of where she's at with him as the owner of the mega bookstore, and his feeling for her, knowing who she is, from the You've Got Mail, and his sympathy for her. And one of my favorite scenes in all of movies is when he goes up to her apartment and she just doesn't want him around, and he brings her flowers because she's sick, and there's a kind of a turning point, and it makes me feel kind of choked up. Not as much as Dirty Dozen makes me feel choked up, mind you. When Jim Brown put those grenades and he pushed it down the... Anyway, you should see Sleepless in Seattle too. Anyway, I love that movie because it is two people that I can respect and for whom I feel affection, and who conduct themselves in ways that don't turn me off. That I believe that marriage is going to be a really good one. So that's the first movie I wanted to talk about. The second movie I want to talk about is Bedazzled. There was a remake in the 80s. I think it was Anne Bancroft, who played Mrs. Robinson in The Graduate, and her husband, I think. But anyway, that's not it. Peter Cook and Dudley Moore in 1967 starred in the first Bedazzled movie, and it's bedazzling, a comedy. They both had other semi-major movies, but they were part of a group called a British comedy group called Beyond the Fringe, which if you ever get a record or recording of them, they were very funny. But anyway, the story in Bedazzled is there's this schnook of a guy played by Dudley Moore, who's got the hots for this waitress, and I don't remember the name of the actress. And he can get nowhere with her. And he's approached by the devil, played by Peter Cook. And he ends up selling his soul to the devil in exchange for 7 wishes. Excuse me. And he's going to use these wishes to get laid, to get this particular woman that he finds very attractive and that he wants. And the thing is that it's kind of a legalistic thing that the devil operates on. He's got to specify exactly what it is he wishes for. And he specifies first wish, and he specifies. And as that wish gets fulfilled, he fails to get what he wants because he failed to specify something that apparently the devil's able to exploit that failure, and the devil fulfills his end of the contract, but that contract wasn't drawn up well enough to get him what he wanted. And that happens hilariously or frustratingly, depending on how you relate to the humor. I say these days my shock absorbers are somewhat shot. And I think when I was younger, in 1967, when I saw this movie, it was all hilarious. Now I feel more a sense of the frustration of poor Dudley Moore, who keeps on making these wishes for which he sold his soul, and he keeps on not getting fulfilled. Now, I used the Bedazzled in a book of mine that you can't see because it's behind my head, but I wrote a couple of books about the dynamics of a market economy and how it does and doesn't fulfill human needs, and why. The system has certain dynamics. Maybe I should let myself get these books. Okay. This book, published by SUNY Press, is about the dynamics of the market system that need to be corrected. I'm a fan of the market, but it needs to be controlled. It has to be combined. As every capitalist democracy recognizes, you need a mixed economy or you go to hell. And which is a lot of what happened before the progressive movement in the early 20th, late 19th, early 20th centuries, is that the capitalism was driving America into a very scary place. But, if you combine the two, that's fine. Anyway, the companion book of this, The Fate of Value in the World of Goods, is the subtitle, and Fool's Gold is the title. I have a chapter there about making deals with the devil. It works metaphorically, and there's Faust, and there are several other things that I bring in from the world's mythology that show that what happens in Bedazzled, excuse me, is a little bit of tea. It's kind of indicative of what happens when you make a deal with the devil. You get certain wishes fulfilled, but the actual fulfillment of life doesn't lie in the material realm, or at least, you need a certain amount. But in fact, I think that there are studies that show that beyond a certain level of income, which is not huge, it's not, getting more doesn't lead to greater happiness. There are studies that show that, my economist father would have put it, wealth has a diminishing marginal utility. So you don't want to sell your society's soul to a system that is all about maximizing utility about regarding those things that can be bought and sold, to the neglect of the things that can't be bought and sold. So I use Bedazzled as a metaphor, along with Faust and other stories about selling your soul to the devil, for the need for a society not to sell its soul to a system that really has blind spots to vital things that cannot be bought and sold. And that I've thought about Bedazzled recently, not in that context of the economic system, but sort of a funny thing about my own life. I'm able to look at. I'll look back on a lot of life, and I've always been a very ambitious guy. Some of my ambitions clearly didn't work out. At the age of 7, I still hope to be a professional football player, a professional basketball player, a professional baseball player. My ambition was to become 6'3", 235 pounds. I thought that would do for all 3 sports. But it turned out that I could be a starter on a good high school team, but not good enough for even a small college on any of my sports. Okay. That wasn't an ambition that would be fulfilled. But I've always, as I put it, swung for the fences. When I wrote about heroic tragedy in college, I was trying to write a book that was publishable, though I was 20 years old, and my committee thought that it was in fact publishable, but it was recommended to Harper. What was it called at that time? Harper and Row, I guess, back in '67. But I never did get that thing published. I still have the manuscript. Anyway, I'm always been swinging for the fences, and this man on a mission thing is really swinging for the fences. And that book back there, The Parable of the Tribes, was really swinging for the fences. So my ambition, if I had been Dudley Moore, I would have, I sort of can imagine that I would have failed to complete the contract very well. I would have said, I want to write something that makes, says some important truths that really could play a very constructive role in making the human world better. Well, that was my ambition. I mean, that's what happened to me in 1970 when that idea came to me. And now, if you go to my website, betterhumanstory.org, you'll see that I've spent it took me 14 years before that came out into the world. And I've had a lot of years since to keep developing it. And I got to tell you that when I graduated from college, trying to decide whether I should say something about, sort of the prestigious way that I did, but I don't know. I want to be credible, but I don't want to be a braggart. But anyhow, when I graduated from college, I had big intellectual ambitions, but what you'll find on that betterhumanstory.org website, And I hope that the same thing is true if you were to, spend a bunch of time with the videos that I've been making the last few months, because I've got a couple of young men who've pushed me into this new world and are managing me. This is how you get things out. I hope that, I feel like I was brought up to understand what I accomplished in my the body of work that I've produced as a writer. Um, I don't know as well how to evaluate what I'm accomplishing in this new genre of work, but I'm doing what I can, including right now. What you'll see that I've accomplished is, I would say, fulfilled. I mean, I didn't sell my soul to the devil, but if I had wished to Peter Cook, let me hit the ball over the fence. This is a higher fence, a more distant fence, and a longer ball than I could have envisioned when I graduated from college. Truly. But I forgot to specify. That, oh, by the way, devil, and let the world grapple with the ideas that I've put out there. Accept them, absorb them into the thinking in a way that that is warranted, because it puts some important things in fundamental things in an importantly different light. It shows our nature as creatures to be different from what people generally walk around thinking, that we are better creatures. I say that I can prove. It shows that the human story is different, has to be understood differently. I mean, it is what it is, but the reasons why it is the way it is not what people have believed. One of the lines that I use all the time is, the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. I claim that I can prove that. I claim that that book, to begin with, proves it. And, I've developed it further. It also, I think, really clarifies the challenges that a species that creates civilization inevitably must meet. I say that any creature on any planet that steps onto the path of civilization, which is an unprecedented thing to happen, if you look at it in an evolutionary perspective, there are big consequences to stepping out of the natural order. I claim that any civilization creating creature will, first of all, unleash a destructive force that's not a function of its nature. And that's what that book is about. And secondly, we'll face the possibility that it will end up destroying itself. A possibility that has become visible in my lifetime. I was born in 1946, so as soon as the atomic bomb was exploded a year before I was born, it became visible that we had that danger arising. And now we got climate change. We got the other. Any creature is going to develop the ability, ultimately, to destroy itself. And it's going to need to order its civilization, overcome the disorder into which it inevitably, and that's that stuff thing, inevitably plunges into a disorder that generates a destructive force. That force has to be brought under control before it destroys itself. That's importantly different light. But when I sold my soul, just fictitiously, the reason Bedazzled comes to my mind is, I feel like I did hit the ball over the fence. I don't know what proportion of the people who I'm trying to talk to, if they actually did go and check it out, would recognize that. I've been working with these ideas long enough that, if they're the kind of people who can understand, a system of ideas, who could, read Tocqueville's Democracy in America and write a blue book in which they, having studied those ideas, would be able to say, this is what Tocqueville said. Or if they read Machiavelli's The Prince, these are the This is the basic perspective that Machiavelli brought. Or if they read Freud and his ideas about the unconscious and how it worked and how the human world. I mean, there are a variety of thinkers. If the people were the kind of people who would understand what a thinker laid out as an argument for how the human world should be understood, those people, I think that they would recognize what I think this body of work, this better human story, that it holds water, that I'm making claims about it that are valid. But anyway, my little bedazzled thing is that my life has been one of the two great fulfillments in my life are that represented in that picture from 1986, and the pursuit of this vision of the human story, and the fight to save American democracy, which is clarified, I'd say, in some vital ways by seeing it in the larger story of that I develop. I feel fortunate to have those two things that are very fulfilling. The hardest thing for me in my life, I mean, I get regular headaches. That's no fun. Not a huge deal. I mean, a little suffering, a few hours a day. I can take that in stride. I've learned how to deal with it. But it's been about 30 years, a little bit more than 30 years since, though I did manage to get that idea out into the world, and it got a somewhat big splash, full-page review in the New York Times. To my mystification, it neither got refuted, accepted, nor struggled with. It just got, after a certain handful of years, it just disappeared. That mystifies me. I've been trying for a long time to understand how that happened. And I've got ideas which I've expressed in some of the videos. But in addition, it has been a source of suffering for me. Now, part of it is selfish. I grew up with, in my family, if you did good stuff, particularly my mom would applaud. My dad was much harder to get applause from. So for the first 21 years of my life, that worked. Work real hard, do the best work I can, get applause, feel satisfied, go on to the next job. So I have some needs. I would like to have gotten the recognition that I was brought up to expect to get if you hit the ball over the fence. But I would have stayed in retirement if that's all there was, because I really do think that I'm not an unfortunate person. You can't always get what you want, as the Rolling Stones used to say. Okay. But I actually do believe that there's a potential beneficial impact on our chances of survival as a human civilization on this planet embedded in this thing that I've been trying to get out there. So, which brings me to the last movie, which is 50 First Dates, which I started off yesterday's live stream, my regular Man on a Mission thing, which has the title about there's Ukrainian blood on these Republican hands. That's one of my strategies is to start off with something people are already thinking about and integrate that in with the bigger picture. That's what I did yesterday. And I started off talking about 50 First Dates. which is Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore, and it's another romantic comedy for which I've already indicated I'm a sucker. I mean, I don't like Adam Sandler's sort of tendency toward the gross, and but the love story at the middle of the thing I like, and since I can fast forward through the grosser things. The thing about that romance is that it has to be conducted given that she had a car accident, and every day she starts out not remembering anything that happened. I mean, I don't remember exactly, but she can't remember the previous day. So he keeps on reaching out to her, and he's a stranger every time he begins. I like that movie. I like the sort of magical things that get played with, and like Groundhog Day, I mentioned, is a perfect movie where he's born. He begins every day, and it's the day he remembers everything about increasing numbers of Groundhog Days that he's gone through, and he's trying to get Andie MacDowell, but so long as he's a jerk, he's not going to succeed. And the whole movie is about sort of the redemption of this guy when he learns that being a jerk and behaving in the manipulative ways that he behaves isn't going to get him what he wants. And he has to essentially it's a Christian message, as I see it. You must die to be reborn. And eventually he stops being a jerk. I feel kind of choked up. I mean, he's such a jerk at the beginning. And he's such a jerk all the way through, utilizing his advantage that he knows so much about her, having, probably thousands of Groundhog Days with her, and she remembers nothing. It's always a new day for her, and it's always, and he's developed an enormous body of knowledge. So he knows what she drinks to. He knows what she drinks. He knows that she was an undergraduate major in French literature. I mean, he knows everything about her, but he's only trying to use it for manipulative purposes. And it's only when he lets go of the small self that he can begin to have real relationships. Real love is not the fruit of manipulation and lies. Anyway, so Adam Sandler's challenge is a little bit like that. He's going to start with, he gets to learn. She doesn't. He loves her. He wants to create a day that will lead to her loving him. And the movie is about how they actually end up with, he ends up having a video that he can show her in the morning. It's a lovely thing. The relevance of that to this man on a mission that I was talking about yesterday in my live stream, 11 a.m. Thursday morning, today's Friday, is that I understand from the people, the two young men, one of whom's my firstborn son, and one of whom is a very knowledgeable computer media guy who actually happens to be the son of a former high school teammate on the basketball team. I was sort of Mr. Hustle, and he had a crack shot. I was fast and not good at didn't have a good shooting percentage. He was slow, and the guy you want to get the ball to on the outer, this is before the three-point shot back in 60, well, the season of 62, 63 was our senior year. So he was a crack shot. His son is guiding me in this process. And I understand from both these young men that until I develop a following, I'm basically Adam Sandler, and whoever's listening to this is a Drew Barrymore. I've been talking, for hours and hours on, you can look at on my channel. Please subscribe. I guess I'm supposed to say, please subscribe to my channel. Um, am I doing okay, Coach? Everybody who's listening to me now, well, I don't know, maybe a few people are now sort of following me to see, because they heard something that make them think, well, this guy might be able to tell me something I want to know. But mostly I'm dealing with a Drew Barrymore kind of an audience of a few people who have never heard me before. And so every time I speak, I'm wanting to be developing this big picture thing that's got a lot of pieces that get put together into a coherent thing that I've been working on since 1970. But I'm dealing with Drew Barrymore. Just woke up this morning, doesn't know a thing about me. So it's how to compose, as I said yesterday, how to compose a message which is intriguing enough for Drew Barrymore that we get someplace in a relationship, that we take a step forward, and maybe they subscribe and they think, but at the same time, can't start at the very beginning for what following I've managed to develop in a couple of months of working on this. There should be something enough to it that makes it rewarding to actually be part of a following. I've been told that don't worry about repeating yourself. And I do recognize that even for people who might be starting to develop themselves into the following that I'm working to get, so that this better human story can survive even my death, because I know from having gone around just to develop that piece of the thing, I know from teaching it at the university level, and I know from going around and giving lectures to university audiences back in the mostly in the 80s, but also in the 90s, about that. That repetition can actually be essential to actually conveying the idea. In one of the videos, I tell the story about this Pulitzer Prize winning Harvard psychiatrist author who read and really appreciated the Parable of Tribes. And then when I talked to him about it, I saw that he didn't really get the main point. He had reduced it all to psychology. It's not about psychology. It's about systemic forces. This was a very bright man, whom I respected and continue to respect. I mean, he died some years ago because he stepped off the curb in Great Britain and looked in the American direction when he should have been looking in the UK direction about where the traffic would be coming from. But anyway, there are 8 million stories in the Naked City. So, and I know that it's not something that people will readily master. I've been working with these ideas for a very long time, since that day in 1970. And I have found, for example, that by continuing to work with them, the new ideas can be derived from it, almost like mathematical. If this is true, then, it turns out that these other things are true. So I'm told not to worry about repetition, but I don't want to bore anybody. I want to be rewarding to the Drew Barrymores and to what I hope will be a nascent following, because I am still a man on a mission, not just to satisfy my own needs for gratification as a person, but because I actually do believe what I said when I started introducing these ideas on Daily Kos, where I'm a regular writer about more concrete things mostly. But I introduced this Better Human Story, saying it's an integrative vision of the big picture of the human story that might actually help human civilization to survive. And that's what drives me. There are parts of that vision that would not survive me the way things stand now. I was granted my wish to do the kind of work that I've done. I haven't given up here in the fourth quarter fighting to get the other wish, which I thought would just naturally happen in the world as I thought it was, that if you produce something like that, it's gonna have an impact. But it can be ignored for reasons that I'm still wanting to understand. So please do subscribe. Please do pay some attention to my efforts here on these videos. If you're at all impatient and if you do like consuming ideas that have been put out systematically, please go to a betterhumanstory.org and you'll see what you see. Thank you. Bye-bye.